When We Were Hackers, Book 1 of 3 of the Dark Cumulus series. Written by Byron A. Aris. Narrated by Robert J. Townsend. Copyright 2018, all rights reserved. ISBN 978-0578-401-300. Dedication to my beautiful wife Ramon and my extraordinary children Abby, Luke, and Jonathan. Thanks for your fortitude while this book was being written. And to Mom and Dad, whose loving spirit has given me wings. About the author. Byron A. Aris is a man who possesses many talents and a vast array of experiences. Born and raised in Jamaica, he moved to New Rochelle, New York in his mid-20s. After some time, he decided the cold winters were not for him and headed south. Today he calls Atlanta, Georgia his home, and loves every minute spent living there with his 3 children and wife. Byron spends his days as a cybersecurity risk consultant, as well as a project management professional. He has over 20 years of experience in both the financial and technology industries. A technologist and entrepreneur, Byron is the head of numerous technology-related projects. He recently set his computer aside to pick up the pen. Byron has always had a passion for writing, so he decided it was time to combine that passion with his real-world experience. When We Were Hackers, Rise of the CEOs, and We Are Back are the 3 books in his Dark Cumulus series. He may have left the island life behind, but those experiences remain a positive and essential part of his life. Aside from writing, Byron enjoys spending time in the kitchen to practice making Jamaican recipes. He loves to travel when time permits, and spends as much time with friends and family as possible. You can find more about Byron by following him on Facebook or at www.byronaris.com. Preface. When We Were Hackers is the story of 4 impoverished teenagers who have found financial help in the most unusual manner. It follows the story of youngsters, but connects them to another group of 4 people who are responsible for their sudden financial help. This is the first book of the series, which focuses on describing the backstories of both groups. Sibby is a young orphan who one day receives information about his dad. He is intrigued and helped by a mysterious mechanical voice on the phone for getting enough money to lead a comfortable life. He is a born leader and therefore creates a group of 3 other friends, including Mark, Anthony, and Chris. He shares his newfound fortune equally with them, but is always intrigued why someone would offer financial help without a cause. However, Sibby and his group are a sideshow when you dig deeper. You will learn about Pete, a genius hacker who just put his hands in things that he couldn't control. This is a story of love, technology, and how greed can destroy even the most thought-out plans. Chapter 1. Got to Love the Future. The phone rang, and 4 teenagers waited with breathless anticipation for the call to be answered. One of them shuffled and cleared his throat. Sibby, who was holding the phone and was the one to make the call, looked at his friend with a frown of impatience and said, "Shh!" The phone rang a second time and was answered. The person at the other end of the line did not say anything, waiting for Sibby to speak and identify himself. Sibby cleared his throat and spoke in a confident, albeit breathless voice. "Can you deliver 15 pizzas for a party this Saturday?" Finally, after a pause, the person at the other end spoke, and Sibby's question was answered by a Morphvox encrypted voice. "Where would you like the pizzas delivered?" Sibby's curt reply was, "On the corner of 6th and Peachtree Street Northeast." As soon as the address was given, the line was disconnected. Sibby and his friends waited at the corner of 6th and Peachtree Street. Just across from them was an ATM. All 4 boys stood staring at it, almost shaking with excitement. Very soon their vigil ended as the ATM made a dinging sound, and money started pouring out of it. There was a lot of money coming out of it, and as soon as the boys were able to, they sprinted across the intersection and started collecting the money that was spilling out of the ATM. No matter how many times they witnessed Sibby do this, the 3 friends, Mark, Anthony, and Chris, was surprised by the power Sibby seemed to wield. They still did not know who the contact was that Sibby had called and given the address to, and how Sibby had known what to say, for clearly the pizza order was just a way to identify that it was Sibby who was calling. For his part, Sibby downplayed who his contacts were, and even though he shared his money with his friends, he kept the details about his mysterious connection a secret. Sibby was no fool. He knew the harsh reality of the world even though he had just turned 16. He had been on his own ever since he could remember. He knew that his mother had died giving birth to him, and he had been brought up in foster homes. Sibby had lived a rough childhood. Even in times like these, when humanity had progressed so far, there were still a few things that had not changed. For example, the foster care system. One would think that in the year 2032, when humanity had successfully integrated AI into their everyday lives, they would have done something to improve the quality of life for the orphaned children. But that was not the case. The foster care system was still a game of roulette, where there was no telling where the ball might land. There was a slim chance that you might end up with good people, but that was the thing. It was a slim chance, and before he had met his invisible benefactor, luck had not been with him. He had always ended up drawing the short straw. Sibby knew next to nothing about his dad. The only thing he knew about him was that his mysterious benefactor claimed to know his dad. No matter how many times he had called them up to ask questions, the line had always been disconnected if he did not say the identifying phrase immediately. Since Sibby was a quick learner, he had stopped asking and would just tell them the address of the intersection that was nearest to the ATM where he was standing. And a few minutes later, the ATM would just start coughing up money. Each time it gave up enough so that Sibby could maintain a lavish lifestyle without arousing suspicion. Anthony, Mark, and Chris had all been sworn to secrecy, even though the only thing they knew was that Sibby could somehow summon money from any ATM just by making a phone call. In truth, the three of them were a little bit in awe of their friend. They knew the kind of skill and expertise that were required to hack the mainframe of any one of the 6 banks that had survived the artificial intelligence AI revolution. That was the thing. The AI revolution had taken everyone but an elite few by surprise. Those who had not been able to learn something about AI had been left out of the progressive loop. It had been chaos for a while, but the governments had been quick to find a solution that worked for everyone. They had implemented the universal wage system for everyone who had lost a job because of AI, and that included over half the population of the world. AI did everything these days. Meanwhile, Sibby and his friends gathered every dollar that had come out of the ATM as quickly as they could and were now running toward their hideout. It was in one of the small packaging factories that had gone bankrupt in the last few years. This was a time when small companies were no more, and only a few industry giants dominated almost every sector. A good example would be Amazon, which about 40 years ago had only been an online bookstore, but now it was the second largest company worldwide, with a stake in every market there was. It sold everything from smart homes with Alexa Lifestyle Integration, ALI, to having just launched one of the best EV electric vehicle, which was like Alexa on steroids. The Amazon platform was integrated worldwide into every electronic appliance, from mobile phones to smart homes to EVs. It was more than a platform. It was a lifestyle. In fact, that is what AI had done. It had become a part of the lifestyle of humans. The whole day was planned by the AI systems that had become a part of every electronic item. From smartphones to smart mirrors to smart refrigerators, it was all automated. You could go to sleep and your alarm would wake you up and open the curtains for you. Everything would be done according to your preferences. Your coffee would be made exactly the way you liked at the exact time you wished to be served, before you showered or after. How and what you wanted for breakfast would be ready for you. All you had to do was follow the instructions given by your AI-integrated appliances on your smartphone, tablet, or computer. People were living on average of 100 years now because of AI integration with medical diagnosis. It was able to catch symptoms and recommend treatments long before any severe development. AI had enough data to recommend what exactly to eat and what to do in order to live to an age of 119 and had a high success rate. The new term that was being thrown around was the lobster life generation, because it was almost a guarantee that people could live to 100 years old. Mark had been the one to suggest the old industrial area as the hideout after they took the money. He thought, and the rest agreed, that as the police could see them taking the money from the ATM camera, they could be caught in no time. It was still one of the safest places to hide their cash, as no one ever came to these places anymore. Even if they did, no one would have been able to open up the hidden safe the 4 of them had installed, in one of the back rooms on the 2nd floor of the packaging plant. This was the floor that had been dedicated as the office area and was relatively cleaner. The boys had put in a few couches and brought in a fridge so they could lay low there for a while. These periods were one of the most difficult for them to live out, as they had no idea if they were going to get caught the next time they showed their faces in public, or if the police were searching for them at that very moment. The rush of adrenaline would just make them jumpy for a couple of hours, after which they would relax there for a few days, usually a weekend. These friends would often make the call at the start of the weekend and hide at the plant for the rest of it. The general consensus was that it was better to be bored at the plant and do nothing for one weekend, rather than risk being caught. Sibby, who had been trained by his harsh childhood, never even let the other three spend the money he had just taken out. He would go to a guy he knew from one of the foster homes he had stayed at and have him spread out the money while giving him fresh cash so that the serial number would not be traced back to him in any way. It was this forward thinking and covering of all the bases which Sibby did that had made him the leader of the group. Whatever he said was almost always followed without too many questions. Even though he was well liked by the other three, he was evidently a person who played things close to his chest. He was charismatic and intelligent, and there were only a handful of times his friends had seen him make a mistake, and even fewer times they had seen him lose his cool. As the boys reached the second floor of the plant, they all stopped, panting in front of the door that they had installed in the room they had turned into their hideout. The entry also contained a retinal scanner, and Anthony, who was in the lead, unlocked it. The rest of them entered into the room and slumped down, laying exhausted on the sofas they had set in the room. Even though it was a hideout, it looked more like the game room in a hostel. The room was big and had 4 sofas, one for each of the boys to sleep in, spread out across the room. There was a pool table at one end, while a gaming station had been set up at the opposite end of the wall. They had also restored the restroom and installed a kitchenette in one corner of the room with a microwave and a mini-fridge. The room had been painted in cheerful yellow and midnight blues. It was exactly like the room Sibby always wanted but never had, until his benefactor had appeared in his life. The boys counted the money, and Sibby distributed the amount equally among the 4 of them. Each of the boys took as much as they would use the following week, and then came back the next weekend for more. Well, that was the way they operated. Sibby had laid a few ground rules, and the others followed them to the letter, knowing that if they did not, they were the ones who would be getting into a vast amount of trouble. That was one of the reasons Sibby, who had a hard time trusting anyone, trusted the other 3 guys. If any one of them were caught, the rest would not be far behind. That was one of the main drawbacks of living in a society that had assimilated AI into everything, where privacy was virtually non-existent. Even though the governments had passed laws on the invasion of privacy and how AI should be restricted from divulging all the data, it automatically learned about the person who was using it. Everyone knew that those who wanted to exploit this did it. That had been one of the reasons that the government had taken an additional step and written entirely new laws regarding the sentencing of hackers. The second reason was the Great Hack of 2027, where hackers took over an entire city and causing massive chaos by encrypting the city vital database and shutting down power and communication infrastructure, which may have caused a few deaths. Hackers were kept alive only in exceptional cases. Otherwise, the general law was that any hacker who was caught would be given the death penalty. This was a steep measure, but no one argued against this harsh law. They all knew the risk the hackers posed to the current lifestyle, which most of the world had adopted. Sibby was thinking about all these things as he went over his couch and plumped down on it, with a chilled beer in his hand. In all honesty, he was worried about the lack of police on his tail. It was on his 13th birthday that he had gotten the mail with the remote-controlled car as a gift, with a note where the batteries were supposed to be inserted saying, "We know your dad. Call the number given and ask for logic." Even though it had been totally random and Sibby was wary of things that did not fit in, because that is what life in the foster system had taught him. He was torn between the desire to know more about his dad and be cautious. For the first couple of days, his cautious side had held firm and did not let him dial the number. But slowly, his desire to know about his dad became overwhelming enough that he was not able to resist anymore. So, being cautious and curious at the same time, he'd made Mark, who had been his friend since they were little kids, call the number for him. When they had found out that it was Mark and not Sibby, they insisted that Sibby talk to them. Otherwise, they would disappear forever. The only secret they told him was that his dad was alive and they were looking after him. He was further told to contact them on this number whenever he was in need of cash. They explained to him in detail what he had to do and how he had to do it. In addition to all this, he was given the warning to behave himself, otherwise he would get caught, and the consequences of that would be dire for both him and his dad. That was the longest chat he had ever had with a person on the other end of the phone, and ever since then, they would have a conversation lasting about 40 seconds only. He had never received anything else in the mail from them, and even though he wanted to know more, he had also learned the value of patience. He knew he would get answers when the person on the other end was ready to tell him. In his mind, Sibby thought that this was some sort of a test to see if he could make sure that he was not caught, as he had been for his earlier misbehaviors. While Sibby was reminiscing about this, he was suddenly jolted from his memories by the thought he was about to realize when he had taken a trip down memory lane. He had been thinking about the lack of cop action in his life for the last 6 years. Even though he had been withdrawing money frequently over the past 3 years, he had been sure when he had started out that he would be caught within a few weeks. The week had turned into months, and the months into years, and still he was free, with a lot of cash on his hands. It was his nature to be suspicious. After all, he had been brought up in an environment that did not let anyone remain trustworthy and honest for any amount of time. If you did not adjust, you were broken, and everyone took advantage of you. And Sibby was a survivor. In fact, he was very good at it. So it was in his nature to be suspicious, even though the person on the call had made sure that Sibby was well supplied with cash over the years. And now Sibby was convinced that the police had been kept off his tail by them as well. Now that Sibby started to think about it, he was sure that moving into the room at the old plant would attract some kind of notice. After all, the power companies would have been able to view power being used at a closed plant. Even then, there had been no one who had come poking around. This was a thought that made the hair on the back of his neck rise up in fear. As soon as he felt it, the fear turned into anger and self-disgust at his own stupidity. How had he been so stupid? He had been thinking that he was being smart and keeping himself off the grid. But it was the person on the phone who had been doing all the heavy lifting for him. Mark, Anthony, and Chris, who had been playing a virtual reality game on the system, suddenly looked at him as he snorted with disgust and threw the can of beer in the general direction of the dustbin, exclaiming in anger, "We have been bloody stupid and freaking idiots! What the hell are you talking about?" Mark, who was Sibby's closest friend, remarked in concern. He knew that Sibby would not be this upset without a good reason. "Did none of you wonder how we've managed to avoid getting caught by the police for this long?" Sibby questioned Mark, his tone a little scathing. "Of course I wondered," Mark replied calmly, unfazed by Sibby's tone. "I just figured that your well-wisher was keeping them at bay. He is obviously a talented hacker with a lot of resources." "Yeah, a talented hacker who knows that we are the ones who steal money that comes out of ATMs and can turn us in at any moment," Sibby said, paranoia taking over his rational thinking. Anthony and Chris, who knew that Mark was the only one who could handle him when he became like this, just sat and watched the two of them. Even though they had been with them for a long time, the friendship between Sibby and Mark was deep. They both knew each other's thoughts without the other saying anything, and they always had each other's back. Although now that Chris and Anthony were part of the team, they were also included in the bond. That was how they knew they had to be quiet and not distract Mark. Sibby had a little anxiety problem, even though he had only shown it in front of Anthony and Chris only once in the 4 years they knew him. Both of them did not want to repeat the situation. "Sibby, what do you think they're going to do? Go to the police after all these years? Man, they are the ones investing resources to give you money. Why the hell would they turn you over to the cops?" Mark asked him in a calm voice. "That is not what I was thinking. What I am saying is that they will turn us over to the cops on the condition that we do not do as they want us to. What if they are grooming us for something?" Sibby inquired of his friend in a low and ominous voice. For what he was saying did have far-reaching implications. The other three looked at him in stunned silence. For it was true. They had not thought about the possibility that this might happen, as the one who called did not talk for more than 40 seconds at a time, and had never called them himself. He had also told Sibby that he was there to just help him out, whenever he needed it. Please pick up the second book, Rise of the CEOs and We Are Back, from the Dark Cumulus series at your nearest bookstore or on Amazon.com.